without a doubt, I think everyone can safely say this is probably the most grueling major we have ever seen to date. And let me tell you, there was so many ups, so many downs. Let's break down what happened at Champions Cup and how we got a brand new major champion. So overall, I think you can safely say that this is one of those courses where birdies are just extremely hard to come by, and they're very tantalizing because they feel like you can do it, but then when people actually go for it, even the best people in the world still fall short because these holes are just so freaking punishing. And I definitely think that there was some benefit to players just playing for par, because let's say for instance, hole 14 chase card for MPO, and every single person doubled besides one bogey. And I really can't think of a hole where that has ever happened before, and it continues to happen because the wind was just so random, so strong, and it was impossibly hard to predict what was going to happen next. And it really felt like the entire course was more of just a war of attrition rather than like flashy disc golf being played. The stress, the weather, the difficulty, it all added up to being a very grueling experience. It proved to be very punishing even for the best players in the world. And spoiler alert, that is probably how we got some of the lowest rated champions and lowest rated round ratings ever for a major. So starting off with MPO, there was so many players in the mix that could potentially take it down because a course like this just inherently has so many stroke separators. So even though Presnell was leading at the start of the day, there was no guarantee that was how it was going to end up. So the first person I want to talk about is Calvin. He was definitely a player that I thought might have the potential to take it down, but ultimately there were just so many moments where he just seemed to lack a sense of confidence in this moment. And even though he had a very hot stretch in the middle portion, getting 5 out of 6 birdies between holes 6 and 11, the rest of his round was just a little bit too all over the place with 4 bogeys and 1 double. But all in all, I feel like his performance here was good but not great. There were so many shots where I felt like he was rushing it. He didn't really have his usual cadence, and it felt like at moments he was just trying to get through the hole rather than playing it more tactfully. And in a similar vein as him, Chris Dickerson also played very, very well for some portions, but kind of lacked any consistency on the other portions. But on the flip side, instead of the middle portion being his hot streak, it was the first 6 to 9 holes. Basically every round, that was where he shot his hottest, and the rest was kind of just a wash. And this is definitely a course where you could see Chris Dickerson taking it down. So the fact that he was unable to do it in the middle portion really felt a little bit surprising, but I think his game and consistency just isn't there yet at the moment. And then a player that we obviously think about but has not really shown up this year, Paul McBeth. In much the same way as Dickerson, the front 9 was where he was really shooting hot, specifically round 3, where he got 7 out of 10 birdies on the front 10. But for whatever reason, he just could not pull it together on the back half, which really put him out of the mix, even though he really fought back hard in the final round, finishing his tournament in 10th place. Overall, not bad, but we definitely expect more from Paul. But especially with his injury, this is still a very good showcase. Before we get to the top contenders, I just want to say a little bit about Eagle. So he did not make the cut. I think he went about 14 over in round 3, and obviously his game is just not there yet. He needs a lot more reps, a lot more trust in the MVP plastic, and just generally a better feel for where his game is at the moment. It is going to definitely look different, and I think it'll take time for him to adjust what that does look like post-injury. But with that said, if anyone can do it, I think it is him. But as it stands, according to his blog, he will definitely still be playing DDO. And here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Not ideal. Worst tournament finish probably of all time. I'm going to use this as valuable experience on what to do and what to not do, and take the positives. A tree cannot grow into heaven unless it is rooted in hell. And I felt like I found a little bit of that this tournament.
Next up, Casey. Obviously, he has some of the most fun shot shaping out of everybody in this whole competition, and it was so evident that everyone was rooting for him. There was so much love for Casey, but after a freak cut on his finger, the rest of his tournament really went downhill quick, with him actually having the winning score, and I think it was hole 6 of round 3, I think, with a 15 under. All he had to do was just maintain even the rest of the tournament, and theoretically he would have won. But with this course being as difficult as it is, that was just not the case, and he really fell flat, specifically on his last hole of the last round, where he took a triple, which instead of finishing top 5, he ends up in 14th place. Brutal. But let's move on to the lead card, because they all had potential to take it down. We had Niklas, Ezra Robinson, Joey Buckets, and Presnell. I would say each one of these players really had so much momentum and confidence that it really seemed like anybody could take it down. Sure, Presnell had the lead, and there was so many moments where it looked like he was going to take it down. But with that said, there was one shot that really seemed to change momentum a little bit. With a relatively easy circle 1 putt for birdie, all he had to do was jam it in. But with the stress and water behind you, that is certainly no easy task, especially during a major, and he airballs and it goes right into the water. I don't believe he ever found that putter. So instead of taking an easy birdie, he takes a bogey, and let me tell you, as somebody that was there filming, the vibes got tense real quick, but everyone here is so good and professional that they really didn't falter much, with the exception of Joey Buckets, who just had an off round. There's a lot of stress going on with that, who was never really in contention and took a double to end it. So realistically, it was a battle between Ezra, Niklas, and Presnell. And with Ricky chasing, there was certainly no certainty that you could really just rest on a par being good enough. And without a doubt, the putting from Presnell after that moment was very much full of confidence and trust, which helped him secure a bit of a cushion going into the final holes. And sure, this may have looked like a battle between Presnell and Niklas. I do think there was so many moments and potential for Ezra to have still been in the mix, but with all these moments and stroke swings, there was still just a feeling and inclination that Presnell had the confidence and trust in his game to secure this victory. And while I was definitely rooting for Niklas, I was still very excited for Presnell to be leading, as somebody that is generally around my same area. And despite nearly all of them faltering after hole 14 is generally where stroke separation happens. But sadly, the wind was just too much, and both the leaders, Presnell and Niklas, took a bogey. So it was looking like it was probably going to have to be a birdie out for Niklas in order to take the win. And my goodness, did they fight hard for it. They both birdied 15, 16, and then 17. Niklas just had to hit this gap that he's been hitting so well all weekend. But of course, stress really affected him. He hits one of the first available and takes a bogey, and Presnell birdies. So it was basically a walk-in from there. Presnell wins with 15 under with a 1043 rated event, which has to be one of the lowest rated events I can remember in recent history, at least for a major. And really, it totally does make sense why Presnell won this. Very much in contrast to Casey's game that was all like very much like super flip-up shots. That was not Presnell's game. He had the same lines again and again, very trusting, not too much distance, no forehand, but just a drastic turnover line in place of any forehand looks. And sure, his putt was a little shaky with that putt that went in the water, but for the most part, his putter was great, and he has really been around for such a long time that I think while this may feel kind of shocking to some people, it totally makes sense why he won this event. And honestly, I was texting my friend, I was like, I think Prezi has it. I think he's going to take it down. And this is like late round 2. It was like really early on to be thinking Presnell could take it. But knowing his game and knowing how much consistency you have to have at a course like this, it really is so obvious looking back that Presnell has the game for this particular course and being a 4-round event in the most crazy weather. And just a little fun fact, he played 42 tournaments in 2021. So he is definitely a player that is known to grind way more than most. And while it is a bit of a bummer that Niklas could not ultimately take it down, I do think he had a great performance. And while I'm sure he's a little bummed, he definitely has what it takes to perform in these major moments. And now on to FPO. First up, Henna. I wasn't really able to see her much, but definitely in the same vein as MPO. So much of this entire tournament was just war of attrition, just continually fight, with one of the hottest rounds in her final round with 5 under, and honestly looked really good for the majority of the time that I was watching her. She had some great fairway hits. Putter is still not the best, but with that said, when she needed to jam it in the most for an eagle putt on hole 18 to potentially go into playoff, she nails it. And wow, how crazy would it have been if it was Henna versus Eveliina? But ultimately that was not the world we got. So next up, Silva Saarinen, and very much a contrasting player to Henna. Much less about like crazy distance, but more so about consistently hitting a very straight line. She did that again and again and again. And despite having a couple of struggles, her putter really was hot. Overall, her game was just so freaking good. Probably some of the best we saw all week. She ends up finishing 2 strokes back of the lead, but really had potential to take it down, except for a bogey on hole 17 and finishing the last hole with par. Really hard to watch, seeing how much grinding she did all weekend. And then next up, Ohn. I would say so much about this entire tournament for her was just getting pars. I would definitely not say it is up to her standard, but with so many of these holes being very hard to get to with her distance, it really was just about, hey, let me just get to the basket in 3 or 4, make a short putt and move on to the next hole. There was nothing flashy. It was just her playing in her own game. And while it never looked like she was truly going to win, she still had a great potential, being just 1 stroke back of the leader. And then just briefly touching upon
McBeth at 69.
I just told myself, you got to will this one in there. Whatever you have, just will it in there.
This man is unbelievable. This is what athletes live for. This is the moment.
Turton. Obviously, this is a player that we don't really hear too much about. She actually has a full-time job in Britain, and while her final round was not her best showcase by any means, overall, this is still just a great performance for her, and I think there was so many moments where she could have crumbled in the first 3 rounds, and she just did not. Her putter was good, her drives were good. There were so many moments where it feels like stress would have gotten to her, but it just didn't, besides the final round. And I think it really can be attributed to, like what she said when I interviewed her, that the weather back home is very similar to this. So with all the rain and wind and wet conditions, it really felt like it wasn't that far off from her playing back home, and that really allowed her to gain strokes on the rest of the field. But with that said, she did fall pretty short in the final round and finishes in 6th place. So before we get to the champ, let's talk about Kristin. I don't really know what to attribute it to. Her shots were a little bit off. Honestly, it may just be tiredness and exhaustion after some of the most grueling rounds ever, but for whatever reason, her final round just had zero momentum. There was no point where her shot shapes looked like it was good enough to really get birdies, and in very much non-Kristin fashion, she gets 6 bogeys on the front 10 holes. I don't really recall that ever happening for Kristin, and along with that, there was 2 circle 1 misses and 2 OBs. So there was just no momentum going for her, and despite that, there was still so many potential moments where you thought she might take it down, because she is just the GOAT and has that ability to just flip a switch and go full beast mode. But ultimately that was not the case. She finishes 3 over, 947 rated, ending her streak of 960 plus rated golf for I think it was 64 rounds. Just totally insane. Definitely the most in FPO, and it really was not even close because I think the second place was Missy with like 28. So just decimating that record. And while the margins may be very close, I think she is still having enough margin to become a 1,000 rated player, which is still just so freaking cool. But with that, let's move on to the champion, Eveliina Salonen. So overall, her round was not great. I would not say this was her best disc golf by any means, but one consistent pattern is that her circle 1 putting is getting a little bit better every single weekend. And while she only got 3 birdies on the entire day, the amount of failures that surrounded her really allowed her to just cruise on in. And with so many of these shots requiring a good drive, she would just do that again and again and again. Maybe not have a great look for birdie, but just have an easy pitch up for par. But with that said, overall in the weekend, she had phenomenal drives again and again. There was nobody that was even close to her. There were some Henna drives that were like pretty good, but every time Eveliina got up to the tee, nobody was touching her distance. And I think a course like this that really requires good drives off the tee, this is just a course that is made for Eveliina's amazing ability to drive it further than everyone else in FPO. And even though there was so many dodgy moments where you thought she might fall apart, she still didn't. She maintained a confident composure. Going into hole 18, it got a little dicey, but she makes it out alive with a par, which put her 1 stroke ahead of everyone else, securing her 2nd major victory, with her first one being Kona Beach Day. And absolutely crazy to think that the only people in contention were essentially people from Europe and Ohn, who is actually from Laos, and it really is crazy how fast everything has ramped up for these European players. So all in all, this is just some of the most ridiculous disc golf I have ever witnessed. It is just insane that they actually were able to have the rounds that they were, with rain pouring down, 30 plus mile-an-hour winds on hole 14. It was just a grueling battle to watch, and I honestly feel so bad for these players because like every single shot shape, it was semi-random where it was going to go on some of these holes. And for a major, that is just brutal. And then you add on to the fact that some of them had to play 2 full rounds in one day. It is just tough. Like you think about it, you're like, yeah, they're professional players, they can do it. I mean, yes, that's true. But when you have to get up early, you have to practice before the round, you have to do that twice in one day. There are just so many factors that make this entire thing brutal. And honestly, at times, I felt like I didn't even want to be there as somebody spectating. It was just that hard to watch, despite it being some of the best disc golf I think I've ever seen. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.